Hey everyone, welcome to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be taking another look at ZIM Integrated Shipping Services Limited, also known by the ticker symbol ZIM. So, boy, do we have a lot to talk about today because it has been an eventful week since earnings, that is for sure. First, let's take a look at the chart. So we could see that, not a ton of big movements since earnings. We have trended down a bit. We broke below that 2250 level we had discussed in the past, but keep in mind, ZIM just went ex-dividend the other day, so that is probably the cause. And we will be keeping an eye out to see if it could recover back into the mid-20 range, or at least hold that $20 level. So we'll be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, man, there's a lot been happening. And there are several catalysts now that are ongoing that may really impact the supply chain and therefore impact ZIM. Now, the biggest one is China, which I'll get to in a second, but first, within the United States, to anyone that's been paying attention, we potentially have a massive railroad worker strike on our hands. Now, it hasn't happened yet. We'll see if the workers do, in fact, go on strike, but if they do, this could be a real impact it could have on the whole supply chain. Now, as we're seeing here, so right now, what we have to wait and see is if Congress will actually intervene to try to prevent this. We have until December 5th. So if there's no deal reached by December 5th, which is just a few days away, then we could have this massive rail strike, which could freeze almost 30% of all U.S. cargo, which that's an incredible amount. And it'll have impacts on specific industries more than other, particularly energy, because a lot of the ethanol, or all the ethanol, is shipped by railroad. So that could impact energy prices, which could further impact inflation and everything else. It could cost the American economy as much as $2 billion per day. Every day. So that's a lot. And as they say, it's going to interrupt the delivery of fertilizers, obviously super important for the food supply and food prices, chlorine for, water, cleansing or whatnot, and other products essential to clean water, food supply, and electricity generation. And it would disrupt up to 7 million travelers a day. This is a really big deal. Now, it hasn't happened yet, and as we'll see, maybe it won't happen, because my hunch is that Congress might come up with a last-minute deal to try to avert this. Nothing's happened yet, but already, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, the Senate and congressional leadership is all trying to figure out a deal to avert this strike. Although, it might not, because Bernie Sanders, some of the Elizabeth Warren, some of the more progressive politicians have basically said they're going to throw roadblocks in the chance to force the strike to be averted, because it's like everything else, labor strikes, the powerful stop it or go out of their way to make it more difficult. So we're definitely going to be keeping our eye out to see if the strike does in fact happen and what Congress's response is, if any. But that could be a major, major, major catalyst for ZIM or for any of these companies that are intricately connected to the supply chain. But the biggest catalyst, of course, is China. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware China is in the midst of a series of large-scale protests. Some people are saying this is the biggest protest since Tiananmen Square all those years ago. And how this is going to impact the supply chain, we could kind of already figure out. And it is going to have an impact on the supply chain. It already has. So, of course, this happened because there was that fire that killed a couple of people in Xinjiang, which has caused all this unrest. And now the government, of course, is cracking down on this unrest. And the protests are just spreading. So we could see they've already spread to Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Wuhan, and Chengdu, all major cities. Although, of note, these don't seem to be big port cities. So that'll be something also to be cognizant of, to see where these protests spread and if they're actually going to impact the shipping industry directly. Although even just occurring in these cities, it's already going to have a big supply chain impact, because that's where a lot of the products are going to be produced that are eventually going to be shipped out. And what's more, hold that thought. What's more is, there's more COVID now lockdowns, which we can't say we didn't see this coming, because we did, and we've been talking about it. But it's becoming more and more clear that China, they're just not going to give up on their zero COVID policy. And as such, now, they're seeing infection rates as high as they were last April when there were those massive shutdowns, although they haven't had as big of a shutdowns as of yet. We know, they're not hesitant at all to just totally shut down major cities to keep COVID in check. And so now we can see some analysts are trying to figure out how that might play in to the economy, and we could see already it's had a big impact. Like on Apple, there were those massive Foxconn protests. That's not a good look for Apple and getting their products. And furthermore, now some of these analysts are saying that they think that China will stay into this COVID coma until at least Q2 of 2023. So we have more lockdown, more disruption ahead of us, at least according to this analyst. But it makes sense because we're entering winter, and we're probably going to see, especially in China, where they haven't had, because they've been so firmly involved in this COVID strategy of the zero lockdowns, they haven't achieved herd immunity or whatnot like we've seen in almost the entire rest of the world. So that could be a disaster. Although, to be fair, this is what they're saying. We don't yet fully understand the impact, but we could kind of figure it out, can't we? UBS is saying that they see this impacting the reopening play until around the third quarter of 2023. Wow. So more harsh news from China, more news indicating that lockdowns are going to continue, and we know that more lockdowns are just going to result in more supply chain disruptions, which could potentially be a catalyst for Zim. And furthermore, we know what time of year we're about to hit. December, the whole, the busiest shopping time. Well, how has it been looking so far? Well, we know that shopper turnout absolutely wrecked Black Friday. People have been talking about how the consumer may be weak. Everyone's trying to save money now because we think we're going into a recession. Well, Black Friday sales were a big hit. So people are still clearly buying stuff. These retailers are still clearly going to be selling to the consumers at this point, which is great. Because think about this, all these catalysts coming together. There's a rail strike in the United States, which could potentially cripple the supply chain within the U.S. China has massive protests at the same time that they also have massive COVID lockdowns, which could, again, completely disrupt the whole supply chain in China. And as we're seeing with Black Friday sales, the consumer is still strong, so they're still going to be buying these products. So we have all these potential catalysts coming together right now. So I'm going to be really curious to see how or if this will impact Zim in particular. and see if they might be able to hopefully profit off the supply chain disruption. I know it's horrible. I know that if you're a consumer or anyone in the economy, you don't want supply chain disruptions, but if you're a Zim shareholder, that may be a boon for Zim, but we'll see. I'm not a financial analyst. This isn't financial advice, just my opinion. But I'm going to be watching to see what impact that the supply chains disruptions are going to have. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Do you think that this is going to help Zim or the shipping industry? Do you think that this won't help? Do you think it'll just have no impact at all? And I'll catch you in the next one.